All right, everybody, welcome. It is the 19th of April. It is 1:05 p.m. We're convened to discuss ARO 2024-104. Are we recording? Okay. 2024-104, the revised 2024 general government budget plus, I don't know if there are any amendments, any other ordinances or resolutions. But that said, we'll go ahead and do introductions. Mr. Johnson.
Zach Johnson. Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Zalatow.
Christopher Constant, and on the phone, Mr. Vaughn.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Salt.
Here.
All right, and also at the table, we have Matthew Farina, our new budget analyst, for his first walk through the budget. And with that, we do this every year. We present our amendment proposals, and then we see our staff and team that are working on the budget go off and coordinate all this into a draft amendment or into a substitute version. And so I am not leading this charge. I'm going to hand the floor to Ms. Zalatow and Ms. Brawley.
Great. So
I will keep the cue.
yes, please. So thank you all. So the hope today is really twofold. One is to talk about the individual proposals. And the other is, as we traditionally have done when we do budget amendments, is to work toward an omnibus amendment so we can kind of make sure all the math works. So as we conclude the day, you don't have to say it on the record, but if there are any amendments here that in the end you wouldn't be able to support or would not want to see included in an omnibus, you'll need to let Mr. Farina know. So those can be set aside because it really is our intent to take these back, work the math so that we can have really probably two packages on the 30th. One will be a revenue side amendment and one would be an expenditure side amendment. And then separate and distinct from those two would be an alcohol tax based amendment. Okay. With that, we usually just go with these in order, but I'm going to turn over Ms. Brawley first.
Yeah, thank you. And this will be brief because we do want to get to the amendments, but we also were talking about kind of prepping for this work session and thinking back about the budget because it feels like about 1 billion years ago since we did the budget in the fall. But we also, before we even worked through the budget last fall, what you have is a copy of a resolution that we passed back in September. So we won't go into detail on this, and this is not something that will be on the agenda because it's already passed, but just really to remind folks where we started with the budget conversation. So we outlined some key priorities. We were, you can read through the whereases. It looks at certain assumptions, but really I want to point us to the section starting on page 2. And again, I won't read them all in detail, but these are really what we had said back in September that we would like to be our policy priorities, the things that we're really going to the extent possible, make funding and investment decisions toward. Of course, some of these are specific to the budget that we had already passed, but just to note, we talked about ensuring adequate funding for municipal services. So that includes snow plowing, it includes public safety, it includes addressing our recruitment and retention issues with workforce and just really making sure we have a robust workforce, maintaining a high level service, and then of course, public access to our meetings. So some of these things, again, have been already taken care of. And I also want to just note, we looked at balancing funding priorities among the areas that are allowed for alcohol tax, looking for ways to support housing and addressing our housing crisis. And of course, all of this is in the context of knowing we have a challenging situation right now, right? We are waiting for the ACFR to be completed. So we don't have all of the information that maybe we would ideally have at this point in time. And then we also want to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible so that we're not making decisions that result in us having to kind of go back a few months later and frantically find ways to pay for it or having to make cuts. So really wanting to be intentional and I guess small c conservative in that sense of not overshooting. So all of that to say, I would encourage you to go back and just look at this resolution briefly. And then as we look at these amendments, it doesn't mean that other priorities aren't important as well. So we don't have to adhere only to this. But that's kind of the way that myself and Co-Chair Zalatow have been approaching our discussion and our priorities. So with that, we can turn back to the individual amendments.
Sure. The First Amendment is Ms. Braga. And the idea is you just tell us what it is, what your plan is.
And Jamie, can you share those pictures? If, yeah, that other one first, and then, so this is Brad Muir from Parks and Rec approached me. We have in Chugach Foothills an off-leash dog park that a lot of people don't know about. It's along the gas line.
Sorry, Member Branga, do you mind bringing your microphone with you just so folks on the phone can hear? Thanks.
In Chugach Foothills, there's an off-leash dog park, and it runs from Clutina Drive all the way up to Basher Road. And when you get to North Fork of Campbell Creek, there is currently, well, Jamie, you can go to the next picture. This is the bridge to get over the North Fork of Campbell Creek. Some neighbors put it in. It's a little dicey getting your bike across. You hold the wire and you carry it. So Parks and Rec had planned a new bridge for us, for people of Anchorage. And they got what's called a Federal Lands Access Program Bridge, flap grant bridge. It was supposed to go in 2020, or designed in 2020. The next summer it was going to go in. Each year it keeps getting pushed back, and now the bridge is scheduled for 2027. And at the same time, the mushing community approached Brad Muir about several problems with the bridges on the mushing trail. And I don't know about all of you, but I think mushing is a super amazing thing that we have going on right in our city. Far North Bicentennial Park is just a network of mushing trails, and there's lots of bridges because it's very wet. And so they were looking for a solution, a lightweight, easily portable bridge that could be moved to some of these locations. So Brad asked if I could try to fund one of these bridges that he discovered. It's from rollingbarge.com. Fairly portable, narrow footbridge. And if it gets an engineer's stamp, he's having me attempt to order the largest one they sell. If it can get the engineer's stamp, then in the future, they can work to replace these bridges on the mushing trail. When our real bridge comes in, we will move this bridge to the mushing trail. And that's all I had to say about it.
Ms. Alto?
Thank you. So it says area-wide general fund. Is that general government dollars, or are these capital bonded dollars that are just unspent from Parks and Rec?
Through the chair, they are the unspent from capital projects.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate the kind of thought about this being interim and then it could be moved. I guess in general, I don't track the park projects super closely, but I know the Park Foundation does. So I just wondered, because I know they always have kind of list of priorities. So I just want to see if they have any opinion on this, or if they would say that this is a priority.
It was listed as a priority, and that's why it was funded with this FLAP grant. Unfortunately, I don't really understand the mechanism that's keeping this pushback. The money is there, but my fear is each year this becomes more expensive to build, and $2020, I don't know if it's going to build the bridge in 2027. I hope so. I think they'll have to scale it back, but it is a priority. Parks Foundation is very aware of this bridge. Just full disclosure, my husband and I threw another, probably shouldn't admit to that. Never mind. It's a little wider than it was.
Okay, I have a question. Do you know why they moved it to 2027?
I have not. So the other project that's funded with the same pot of money is making East 56th go straight into the Science Center, or 65th, where Cassoon Elementary School is. They have, with this same funding, they were going to make it go straight into the Science Center so that there's not a people aren't turning right after the light at 65th. And that is pushed back as well. Supposedly the money is still all there, but I don't know.
I have a recommendation, separate from this amendment, to inquire and find out if there is some unmovable reason why it was moved, because in the fall, again, when we come back to the CIP and CIB process with the budget for 2025, we are the ones who get to set the timelines for those projects. And so it's worth considering. We have to consider it in the context of what's achievable. And so if they have a reason why it makes sense, it's 2027 or later, fine. So just think that process through for the later in the year. Okay, and I was prompted to let folks know that this isn't for debate on specific amendments. It's just for getting questions and clarification. So anyone else on this amendment? Nope. Okay, and what's interesting about this packet is it's not a 1/4 inch thick. So this meeting may go pretty swiftly compared to other years. So the next amendment also, Ms. Braga, it's Anchorage Health Department. Go ahead.
VOA, I blurted out at the meeting about their shortfall of funds to run their residential treatment facility. I think I said it right this time. And I'm thankful to Member Zolotel who knew that they were rattling around looking for money in all different areas. And she asked me to check in to see how they are doing. And they're fairly certain that they have 200,000 from Wasilla. And so she said that at this point, she felt like 100,000 would fill the shortfall. The other question that Member Zolotel asked me to check in on is this going to be every year handout? And this is a state program. And so they need to be funding more if this doesn't cover it, which was a very good thing for me to ask. And she said, as soon as they get the Medicaid fix that charges correctly for youth, they're not going to have this kind of shortfall again. So 100,000 is what they're going to need to make their program whole. And they're the only residential drug treatment program for youth that's still open in the state at this time.
Okay, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. I see the fund source is a reduction for the mobile case management grants. And it might not be a question for you. I may have to actually go to the health department. I know that there was at least one proposal in the request for grant proposals for that grant that came out of the Behavioral Health Task Force. And after getting to listen to the conversation last night at the special assembly meeting, I think those mobile health case management grants our mobile health case management opportunity is really, sounds like an important piece to the overall strategy we might have in 2024. So I'm just curious if that reduction would make that grant program not go. So can we make it go for $230,000? And if you don't know, that's fine. I can follow up with Kim Rash.
I really don't know. And I'm really not sure why this money wasn't out the door, why it's still there. You know, it hadn't been spent as yet. And so she offered it as a possible fix. But you're right, if we do need more mobile case management, that could be problematic.
If there's room under the tax cap or in general government, do you have any any feelings about funding it in that manner?
I have no problem with that. I was
Thank
just
you.
looking for the most logical department.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, I had similar question, and I was just for context, I went back to basically this original amendment from the FY2024 budget. So in the past, there was a direct grant to VOA for $100,000 in 2023. That was cut and replaced basically with this. With what Member Zalatel mentioned, the $330,000 for mobile case management, and then there were two other kind of one-time expenditures that were cut to make room for this. And so one, I just want to note that we're basically this would be a one-time, or I believe it would be going back to our original policy, which was a one-time thing, making it recurring as I understand it. And I support this amendment, but I just wanted to flag that. And then I actually wondered with members Alatel, Voland, and Rivera, if you have thoughts about this amendment, just because you guys were the ones who cut this in the first place to make room for this other piece. Thanks.
So I'll jump in first because they can't see on the phone. One, it wasn't a cut. It was a mistake that the VOA grant was carried through. The prior year, it was one time and not recurring funding. So I really don't want to frame it as a cut. Unfortunately, that mistake, though, did create expectations. I think the behavioral health mobile case management coming out of the task force and its recommendations is important, and it leverages really well with our investments and our current pilot of 24/7 mobile crisis team work. So that's what I would say about it. I don't know if Mr. Rivera and Mr. Voland have anything further.
Yeah, this is Member Boland. I'll jump in. Meg asked my question, so you can take things too. But I would prefer, if we can, to make the mobile crisis management team go under the current appropriation, and if there's room under the tax cap, as Val suggested, fund this $100,000, because I do think it's a very worthwhile and important program. Thanks.
Daniel, can you restate that? The interpreter had a little challenge hearing you, and I think some other folks too.
Sure. I was going to say that I would prefer what Member Zalatel suggested, to put this under general government, under the tax cap, if there's room, and maintain the current appropriation under the health department for mobile crisis management.
Okay, and it's mobile case management, not crisis, but so just we're not talking
mobile
about
case.
MCT, we're talking about the teams going out doing case management, but that's fine. I think your point is clear now. Anyone else on this amendment? Okay. Next amendment, Mr. Myers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is one time, and it's 3 million. I see there's a $3 million typo down there, but it should be 300,000. One time maintenance and operation under the tax cap general fund to replace the antiquated generator that's on its last leg at the Chugach Senior Center. There are 2 generators out there, and there's 3 buildings on site. There's 2 generators. One is a HUD generator because it's a HUD building. I sent a letter about a month ago to Senator Murkowski's office requesting funding to help replace that generator. This would be for the MOA building, the MOA generator, and estimate is coming in somewhere around 150,000. We don't have the final numbers back yet. Then they want to do an upgrade to the bathroom, a bathroom and a kitchen. So that's what the additional funds are for.
So I have a question for this one. Are there other unspent, not going to be used bond funds that, I guess probably not, because this is Eagle River. It's never going to be, because the bond funds tend to be ARDSA or in a service area. But it would be nice to find if there are some actual capital dollars available to do this rather than operating dollars. Anyone else? Yeah, I don't have any objections. I just make sure we narrowly tailor the funding source. No questions? Okay. Next one, Member Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. So this is following up on something that was discussed back in the fall during the budget process, at least with myself and Member Rivera, and we decided to not take action on it at that time. So this is part of the unified funding proposal, which means basically multiple organizations who serve folks experiencing homelessness, for which we have used our part of our alcohol tax for operations. So those 3 of those organizations are Catholic Social Services for the Complex Care Shelter, the one on Fireweed that serves folks with medical conditions, the Brother Francis Shelter, which serves actually also serves folks with medical conditions to some extent over by 3rd Avenue. and then Covenant House, who serves youth and transition age young adults. So these three items are already line items in the alcohol tax budget. However, they were not, I guess, funded to the FY23 level in our FY24 budget because the increases that were done in first quarter last year were not added back in by the administration. And at the time, we opted also not to bring those back in as amendments. And so this would increase just to briefly state, it would increase the total for complex care total funding to 1.83 million. So it's adding 500,000 to what's there now. It would increase the Brother Francis shelter. Looks like it is, I think it's 445 right now. So it increase it up to 670, consistent with last year. And then Covenant House is currently at 600,000. So this would increase it to 730,000. And again, matching FY23. So that is the proposal. And then we can get into more detail at another time, but essentially there is what we believe to be some duplicate funding appropriations, or at least in excess funding appropriation for the safety center and community patrol contracts, which are also proposed to be funded through general government. So we're still working that out, making sure that would actually work to shift the current alcohol tax funding without impacting that other operation. So it's a revenue neutral proposal. Thanks.
I do. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's sort of implied here, but just to make sure perfectly clear, lacking this additional funding for these operations, they would not have sufficient funding to continue their operations through the entirety of 2024. Am I reading that right?
That's my understanding, or at least they would have to go find different funding. And so again, I spoke with these organizations several months ago. They raised this issue with the 23 budget versus what was in the 24 budget. So we had opted to come back to it now.
So it's not so much expanding services or operations, it's just to continue to keep the lights on and the level of service they've been providing thus far to keep it operating.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Consistent with what we funded last year.
I think, and I'm not up to speed on the fine details of this, but I think there was somewhat of a commitment made with Catholic Social Services, and I'm not exactly sure the nature of it, but this one has come up a few times, and it feels like every other month this request comes up, and I forget if we funded it or not. We didn't, so then everyone's like, oh, but we still have to fund it. It's one of those things that was a deferred affirmative plan. I do have a similar, Mr. Rivera's wants in the queue, question and concern, and that's just, are we intending these as a permanent or one-time funding? And I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had, maybe not from this appropriation, but what is it? And to answer the question of, are the lights going to go off? There's at least one location on here that I think the lights will be on after the sun goes out because they're so aggressive at their fundraising. So I'm not so concerned, but it's great to be able to support them. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a little bit of history, because I think the coordinated funding proposal originated before several of the members joined the body. So the original coordinated funding proposal was split into two parts. One part that was done in November during the regular budget cycle, and then another part that was done in April during first quarter budget revisions. And essentially what that caused, the April parts ended up being just one time. So what that has caused is us needing to come back and refill that one-time funds. So I'm hopeful that in the future, we'll just be able to make everything permanent in the budget, so that we don't have to keep coming back and fixing the proposal during first quarter, because it does cause confusion. I understand that. And then with regard to the year-to-year permanency of these funds, I'll just go back to when this was originally proposed. Maybe it was a couple years ago at this point. The idea was that the coordinated funding proposal would serve as really a basic safety net of services that we as the municipality would provide. And this is how we would, through the alcohol tax, fund for these basic services. And this was sort of our agreement, our promise to come in and help with these things. So it doesn't mean that we can't make different decisions in the future, but I think there is some sort of expectation that we continue to fund this basic proposal. Thanks.
Anyone else? Ms. Littlefield?
Because I'm very new at this, thank you very much. The proposed amendment is not an increase, decrease, but it's neutral. Can you explain that just a little bit more to me? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So essentially this would, it would increase appropriations to 3 of the lines that are already in alcohol tax by these amounts. And then it's not spelled out explicitly here yet, but we will work on it. That 855,000 would be decreased from a line that's in the existing budget right now. That is, it's the under mental health and substance misuse Anchorage Safety Center Community Patrol. So that's currently at 2 million. What I heard from the health department earlier this week is they have used a part of that money, not all of it. And then elsewhere in the budget, there's an appropriation to essentially fully fund that contract for the rest of the year. So we're still working out exactly where they are and how much we could move out of that 2 million in the alcohol tax, but we believe that there's some room there. So that's where it would come from, but it's just not spelled out yet.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, and just briefly to Mr. Constance's comments and notes, I think bigger picture with the alcohol tax, the story is we know that it's intended to be used for a variety of things that are spelled out now in the charter, and that there's intended to be some kind of balance. There's not a, we have to spend a third on each of those items, et cetera. But we know the reality has been that there's been appropriations that haven't been spent fully, and a lot of the fund balance in particular and a regular appropriation has been used for homelessness generally. And so that's really what's happened the last few years. So as there's a group working on the alcohol tax strategic plan, we will have a work session on that in the near future. And I think that's really that hopefully we can start to have that bigger picture conversation about kind of what expectations are set up when organizations are funded through this tax. What is the mix of uses we want to use for it? How flexible is it? And so I think that big picture conversation will definitely happen. In the meantime, I think as Mr. Rivera said, we're trying to continue to make good on the commitment we've made. But I think that is a valid conversation to have about this and really all of the appropriations over time. Thanks.
Anyone else? Ms. Braga?
I wrote down 1.83 million. So this 855,000 brings it up to 1.83 million, or did I just hear wrong on that?
So the 1.83 million is what was in the FY2023 final budget for Catholic Social Services Complex Care. That's what was provided through alcohol tax. Right now they are getting 1.33. So it's just that 500,000. Yes, thank you.
All right, anyone else? On to the next amendment, Amendment 5. This one is Ms. Alatillo.
All right, so this is on the the revenue side of the House. So this would adjust revenue and financing sources back to the previously approved 2024 budget level. It reverses the AWU water dividend increase, the municipal airport dividend increase, and deletes the community assistance decrease. We went back and did a historical look at community assistance. We generally pull in 4 million or more, and we have made it through the House budget in that posture. So we have good reason to believe that's the case. One thing we do have the ability to do is after the ledge finishes, right? If community assistance doesn't make the cut, we could still go back and look at the AWU dividend increase. But after hearing from Mr. Corsentino yesterday, I would rather hedge our bets. Bet on the state. It's an iffy bet, but still bet on the state with the historical perspective behind us and make this shift. It does pick up about $527,000 of tax cap capacity, but remember we had $1 million of taxing capacity as well as that policy choice on the Building Safety Service Area Fund.
Any questions on this? Okay. Next, we have Amendment number 6, Maintenance and Operations. Ms. Alatillo.
So the idea here is we had, before we saw the amendments, there was quite a bit of room under the tax cap. And while there were some dollars put towards snow, it never feels like enough. So we were just picking up the difference. I want you all to know, because it's related and it's not related to Ms. Brawley. Yesterday, I'll have a different snow-related amendment that will likely dip into this pot of money. We learned yesterday through some AMATS policy choices that People Mover is getting a lot more capital funding. And part of that capital funding will allow them to have more equipment to remove snow. Right now, they only have a 4-person crew to make that happen. And so the proposed amendment will be to add 2 more positions for purposes of those site facility improvements. It will be well under this amount. I'm just working on the final numbers from People Mover since we literally just learned it. But really, again, it's about snow. And that will be with work I'm doing with Mr. Voland. Sorry to slightly hijack it a little bit, Ms. Brawley.
Anything?
I guess I'll just briefly add, we did hear that already M&O, the department is anticipated to quote, run hot, which means to have significant overtime. So we just are also mindful of the fact that clearly the service needs of that department are outpacing its budget. So I think that's really the big picture and just making space for that, because as we know, it's hard to do.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks. Again, I just to make sure my assumptions are correct here, we're not really saying specifically within M&O, this 750 would have to go for this or that purpose. It's just sort of giving them extra leeway. And then there's they exercise some discretion about whether it needs to go to cover the shortfall with overtime or other operational expenses. Is that right?
Yep, that's why we use those words snowplow and hauling budget.
Yeah, those are some pretty broad umbrellas under the budget. Next one is Amendment 7, Zalatel and Brawley.
So this really builds off of what Anna said at the beginning about our priorities. It combines the purchasing staff position, the city hall employee parking for 8 months, and the retention bonuses for all non-reps into a singular bucket of money that can be used as a part of an MOA employee recovery plan. What we know is we have contract 71, local 71 contracts still coming forward. We've asked for an AMEA reopener. So we've asked for some things and we know some things are in motion. And so this lets us do is hold the money and have that further conversation about how we meet our employee retention and recruitment goals, both on the labor and non-labor side of the house, without having to make any very specific decisions today. Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add 2 things. One, this is an area where obviously we have limited authority to make these decisions, right? So what we're proposing is that that we want to make sure that we're holding this funding and that there is a holistic look, considering things like fairness among, labor groups and among those who are non-rep and rep, and also just acknowledging. So I guess that's one is right. We're not quite sure, but we want to work with the administration on what this needs to look like further. So rather than making these kind of very specific decisions right now, we're proposing to step back and make that holistic look. The other thing to note is, we passed earlier this year, passed an approved increase to steps for non-reps and a broader band of pay for executives, and really looking at how people can be, how we recognize our employees over time and retain them. So that is another kind of factor that we need to look at, is how we make room for that in the budget. So this is not going to be sufficient to cover that, which is partly why we made that effective 2025 to the extent that we could, when it other than the pieces that were already budgeted for. But just to say like this, that we know that this is going to be a much bigger conversation as part of our budget, and it's going to take time and it's going to take multiple components to really sort through. So this is really just our placeholder for now, but we are looking forward to working with the administration on what the plan is. And again, looking holistically across the muni and all of our different employees.
All right, I have a question. This document references MOA Employee Recovery Plan. What is that? Is that a thing?
It's not a specific plan, so it's not capitalized.
Okay.
But it goes back to our AR, where we said that internal recruitment and retention was a high priority for us. We still have considerable vacancies, and so it's time to roll up our sleeves and start getting
Okay,
to it. And so this gives us some resources to effectuate whatever we come up with.
Okay, so it's not referring to a plan that's in development or some substantive effort. Yeah, I know. Believe me, I get it. Plans and plans and plans that sit on shelves. I just need to understand. Thank you. It's just a general idea then. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Next is amendment number 8, Member Brawley.
So continuing with the general idea that is rather ambitious. So this is essentially, it's also a revenue neutral proposal. We know that we have already committed a great deal of funding toward emergency cold weather shelter. Almost all of that we've pieced together through a small part of general fund balance that we were comfortable with, and a lot of ARPA money, our remaining ARPA money, and then alcohol tax. And a lot of that was actually fund balance as well. And I know one of the pieces of, or one of the themes that's come through the Housing and Homelessness Committee over several months is the request from the health department to really say, how do we get out of this kind of emergency reactive mode and really operationalize emergency cold weather shelter, which has been in our code for many years, has looked different over the years, but has never really had dedicated general funding toward it. And so this proposal, right now it says $1 million. That is totally dependent on where we land with general government capacity under the cap. So that number may and likely will go down. But the general idea is, to the extent possible, to find general funding and to swap that out for what is currently alcohol tax funding for this spring. And then to the extent that there's leftover funding for as we look ahead to 2024-25 winter. Because at the end of last spring, we ended with about, I think, 900,000 that we were able to put toward this this coming winter. So really, we're looking at 2 seasons in 1 calendar year. So again, this is really aspirational, but my proposal is really to find the funding, put it in the general government under the cap as on a recurring basis. And we know that this isn't enough. This amount is not enough to fund that need. That need itself is going to change over time, hopefully, as we mature our approach to cold weather shelter. But in the meantime, that's the proposal.
Ms. Walland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take myself off speaker. Hopefully you all can hear me okay.
We can hear you.
I guess, okay, thanks. A question I have for the sponsor of this is sort of why move it out of the alcohol tax fund balance? So that's my first question. And then I guess my second question possibly would be for Mr. Farina. As there's been a couple of these that I have sort of taken the source out from alcohol tax and put it into general government or under the tax cap. So how much room do we have? How much headroom with these amendments potentially would we have opened up in the alcohol tax? And then, I mean, I think we're possibly over on our tax cap here. So just trying to get a grasp of what we're working with.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. Ms. Barley can start.
Okay, yeah, I'll leave the questions about the cap to Mr. Farina. I think for my approach, 2 things I know for sure. One is that we are about $1 million under our FY23 revenue collection. So we had budgeted for 16 million and we received 15 million. So one answer is trying to kind of roll back and because that also affects fund balance. Even if there were things that were not fully spent last year, we're still looking at $1 million less in revenue than we had originally budgeted for last year. And that may still be true this year. That might be the new normal. So I'm looking for ways to roll that back slightly. The other 2 things I forgot to mention. One is, or I think I said this already, we really relied on alcohol tax to fund almost all of our homelessness activities other than federal relief money. So I think that's a policy choice, but that is a question I would like to raise. And I have this proposal to make an alternative to that. The other is that as we've been advocating for shelter funding from the state, we made a commitment as part of that. If they fund summer months, we will continue to fund the winter months. And so it's not sustainable the way we've been doing it, trying to scrap together one-time funding and fund balance, because we're coming, I think, to the end of having significant alcohol tax fund balance as we are getting better at spending it year over year. So really, if we are committing to do that, I'm attempting to start to find money in the budget on an ongoing basis. And again, it could change over time. It doesn't mean that it has to be for the shelters that we're running right now forever. But the intent with that line is to make sure that we're not just scrambling at the end of every year to try to find it. Thanks.
Okay.
Have any response, Mr. Farina?
Through the chair, the amount under the tax cap with the amendments proposed here, it's very, very close to being too much. So if there's any other changes, we'll have to make sure we balance it out.
Okay, so just to summarize, I think with these amendments, we are bringing the alcohol tax back to reality. but in doing so, getting very close to tax capacity. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
I
Thanks.
will put a caveat out there for Matthew, that Mr. Farina, that for all of us in regards to Mr. Farina, that he's just getting a handle on all of these things, and this is a moving target. And many of these questions we're asking are like asking for an attorney for immediate legal analysis on a complex question that the only reputable answer could be, I need to get back to you with that. And so in some ways, some of these questions might be questions that are put on the table today, like, can you get back to us what a comprehensive, with all of these, what it would do to the caps? And just let's not expect that we can get those exact numbers here right now. So just, that's my little caveat. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Member Brawley bringing this amendment forward. A couple of questions on the revenue sources. So on the intent of this $1 million recurring, at least for this fiscal year, is the intent here that this $1 million be used for the FY2024-25 emergency cold weather shelter season?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Rivera. My intent is to basically swap out part of the proposed appropriation we've already made to the extent that that's possible. And then if there's overage, especially because we know some of the hotels are closing sooner than we had originally anticipated or budgeted for. So whatever would be left over would be available in theory for that next year. And so there may be a need to attach an additional name of a fiscal year on there to make sure that that's clear. But that's the intent, is it's not adding money, it's swapping out money we've already appropriated.
Do we have a sense yet of how much money that we've appropriated is unspent? And I guess to the question, like, do we know that we have $1 million of unspent alcohol tax fund balance?
No, we don't know that yet. And I think that scrubbing will be done when we balance all of these amendments, and there's going to be some consolidating of them that will limit some of them possibly based on what is known.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, then Mr. Rowland.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. So this it's an interesting one to chew on. So it sounds like, if I follow this correctly, let's say we don't do this. There may be the money in the alcohol tax to provide the $1 million we're looking for to continue to operate. Then we also were grappling with the fact that we might be up to or close to the tax cap. So in part, it seems like there's a lot of unknowns, and maybe this is more of a sort of philosophical question, which kind of makes me think, if that's how we're approaching it, might it make more sense to take this up when we do the 2025 budget? I mean, if we're really thinking about structural changes as opposed to the first quarter stuff, which seems to be like sort of, I imagine, the minor tweaks. I mean, I guess that's just kind of where my mind is intuitively going with this. So I'm just wondering if there's something I'm missing here, or if that is potentially, a viable alternative if we want to have this conversation at a different time.
Yeah, I guess I'll say three things. One, yeah, definitely we should have this conversation, right? This is just a policy choice. Two, I do need to follow up with AHD and see where we're at. But we certainly appropriated more than $1 million this year on alcohol tax. So it could be a retroactive swap out essentially. And then in terms of the amount, it might be that $1 million is not feasible. So I will look at, I'm open to that being a smaller number. So I guess ultimately the question is, do we want to do this if there's room at all, more so than the specific amount?
There's also Mr. Vaughn first, then myself.
Thank you. So, it's interesting. I just have a couple quick thoughts. We've talked a lot about buckets in the alcohol tax and how to maybe make those proportions between the buckets more even. So that's one thought that I have. And I think this kind of maybe is one effort to do that. We've also talked about, the potential for alcohol tax to pilot things like the mobile crisis team, for instance, and then find other funding sources for them. So, on that same example, we're moving MCT under SEMT funding rather than alcohol tax. So I can appreciate that. But we're also in sort of like the final stages or semi-final stages of putting together the alcohol tax strategic plan. So on Member Johnson's point, I wonder about that too. Is this the right timing to be doing that, since maybe that plan will come before the body soon? So those are just a couple thoughts on this, not to debate it, but just to kind of put that out there. And I guess, I'm curious about the process going forward, when we think we will have more of a firm grasp on the numbers remaining under tax cap or in the alcohol tax. And the reason I ask that is because, we have a list of amendments here, and I don't know, maybe there's room for me to bring forward one or two, but if we're already close, I think a number of these are worthwhile, at least, if they can move forward in part and do it going through the omnibus process. And so I guess I'm just trying to get a grasp for myself of whether it's even worth it to bring forward further amendments above and beyond these. And so going forward, when can we expect to have a little bit firmer grasp on those numbers is my question.
So, I hate to put folks on the spot. I see some smiles in the back of the room. The reality is we won't know until the balanced budget, until the audit and we see the final numbers for 2022 to understand where we are with all of our fund balances relating to any of the tax pools. I know that they're getting pretty close, but we're doing our best guess. And so, but I know that by Tuesday there will be, or maybe not Tuesday, there will be a public hearing on Tuesday. By the 30th, there will be a breakdown of all of the budget monies that we have, and we won't outspend what we know that we have, but I can't say between now and then when that will exactly be. I think it's really the budget chairs will work with their team and work with the OMB and the CFO and our financial analysts, our budget analysts, to get those answered. So it's happening real time. And after these amendments, the theory of getting the amendments in by email whenever they set that deadline was so that all these would be in the packet and people could see them. As is always the case, members may always bring amendments until it's all over. We just have to sort through the answers to the questions you just asked, Mr. Vaughn, which I don't know. But by the 30th.
The request would be is if you're thinking of alcohol tax amendments, just bring them.
Yeah, so Ms. Zalatil says if you are thinking about amendments, get them on the table as soon as you can so they can enter in the conversation.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. It's just interesting to think about, what is the reality of our situation, who's getting what information in terms of what our spending can actually be. And I don't want to bring stuff forward if it can't go because we're constrained by budget realities. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that the primary assumption that we should all be making is that generally speaking, there are more needs than money, and that we have to go through this process to narrow down our priorities so that when we do get to the last day, we have those hard conversations about what goes and what doesn't go. And so all ideas are welcome now. And as we get closer, we will have more information. It's, I don't want to belabor the point, but we should know what we have by now, but we don't because we can't. And so we're doing our best. Bring it forward, put it on the table, and then let's evaluate what we can do by the 30th. That's, again, the rationale why we moved to the 30th from the 23rd is that will give us at least that much more time to get a couple more pages of the audit done, a couple more pages of clear information so that we have the best information possible at the latest possible time. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I also want to remind folks, so I'll state again, my intent with this is to be revenue neutral. So if we're making room under the cap, then I also need to go back and look at what other changes we might make. And then in the budget right now, the version that we got from the administration, from OMB, does have some policy choices that we discussed. So the BSSA, the Building Service Safety Service Area, which is about, I think it was 1.6 million, and that could be changed. There's other items in there. So really, I mean, I'm not proposing that I have all the answers for what that mix of things needs to be. We've got some in these amendments, but that's just something to be aware of, that there are already policy choices in there and there's room. So, so that's really the general advice for general government and alcohol tax to consider at this point.
Yeah.
They just aren't all reflected in amendments that have been made right here. So.
All right, I have a question about this, and it's not really about this money per se, but it's about the conversation of what this is going to support. Do we have for, say, November and December of 2024 funding available for emergency cold weather shelter in the budget? Does anyone know?
So to my knowledge, because we did try to not over appropriate as I was working with health department to figure out what the totals needed to be. So, so in theory, no, what we found was up to May 31st. However, if some of that money ends up being unspent and we over appropriated, that's what would be left. So right now there is no separate, to my knowledge, there's no separate chunk of money that was set aside for 24-25.
Yeah, okay, well, that's a big red thing that's not too far in the future right here that we have to deal with. So, any other questions on this amendment? Nope, okay, we're getting to the end of the packet. One last, and this one comes from myself and Ms. Alto. Ms. Alto.
Oh, thanks. You'll let me deliver the news. So this is the Anchorage hydropower utility. Since we have 0 personnel, it doesn't make any sense to add an admin to that. So that will free up some room under the spending and under the cap. If there's a real desire to prop up the Anchorage hydro utility, which I have a huge desire to put someone in that seat, the other option would be to just shift this money into general labor so that they could offer it for an even more lucrative package to come be our Anchorage hydropower person, or find a contract. So either way, it doesn't make sense for admin support to me, but it could make sense to add a portion of it to increase what might be available to bring someone in, or to allow a contractual opportunity while waiting for someone to please take that job.
Discussion on this amendment? Nope. Okay, so I may have a small amendment to the tune of about $15,000, so almost nominal, on a topic I'll bring up later this week or next week. But so otherwise, any other discussion on this? Plans?
Oh, yeah, I want to remind how we're going to go forward.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
All right. So far, this is the amendment packet. If you have any late breaking ones, because you see that there's an opportunity, if you could really try to get those to Mr. Farina no later than Monday or Tuesday so that he could circulate them so all members can see them. Remember, we can't circulate among ourselves, but Mr. Farina can do that for us. Anna and I will be putting our heads together with Mr. Farina and smarter people than me to do the math to make sure it works. And also, if any of these are non-starters for you, you don't want them included in some kind of omnibus package, again, please reach out to Mr. Farina and let him know so he knows to set those aside. Then the order of operations generally would look like we would move the omnibus packages and then the individual amendments on the 30th.
The public hearings will occur at the meeting of the 23rd. We don't intend to postpone and continue the public hearings to the date without having heard them. We can continue the public hearings, and that's probably wise, to the meeting of the 30th. So we have at least 2 opportunities for the public to be heard. Or we could close the public hearing and publish a new public hearing. So there's a second public hearing. So like we do with the main budget, people can testify more than once. We'll have those final discussions, but we will have the public hearing on the items that are coming forward on the 23rd. Ms. Alton.
So that reminds me. So if you do have additional amendments, so these went up on our work sessions page so the public can see them. Actually, if you could get them into Mr. Farina by the close of business Mondays so that we can update the packet that's on the work sessions page, I think that's really important. So any new amendments are out there prior to the public hearing. I think that's really important for the public to be able to see.
Ms. Braga.
I'm sorry, I just didn't I didn't really understand this Anchorage hydropower. So it's 135,000 to get someone in that position, but you want to take this money away because you feel like it should be under the budgets for departments. It's that they would be a muni employee and this isn't. I'm
Yep.
sorry.
So Anchorage Hydropower Utility currently has a separate amount of money to put in the director, right? And that's the position we've been trying to fill so we can get our vote back for Klutna. This was supposed to be support staff for that. And so Mr. Constant and I discussed, why do we have support staff when we don't have staff at all? And $135,000 is a lot of money. So we've just right now proposed to remove it from the budget. If we could find, and maybe working with the municipal manager or otherwise, some amount of that money that could go back to that primary position we really, really need, or some contractual relationship, we might use part of it. But we don't think right now it makes sense to have support personnel when there's no primary personnel.
Makes perfect sense.
One idea that I'd been throwing around in my head for this was instead put it into our legal fund to support our efforts to restore the Eklutna River. But we didn't go there today, but we may come back there at some point in the future. I think there would be some great symmetry in using funds that are generated from Anchorage Hydropower Utility to defend the river. And to get the plan that works for all of us. But we aren't going to go there because that's maybe premature. And so instead we just cut it. So that's the proposal. Anyone else on the amendments? So the Dunbar principle is in effect. The hour of the meeting was the scheduled time was a target, it was a ceiling, not a target. And so if there's no final comments, we will adjourn for the weekend, get out and enjoy the gray.